Hi there, and in this video I want to discuss the following topic. I'm sure that lots of times you have seen the following under the collision section, okay? Basically collision layer and collision mask. Well, maybe you have seen some tutorials in which they use a lot this feature, and maybe in others that are even full courses in which they don't really take advantage of this. So in this video I want to discuss whether you should actually use this feature or not, if it depends on the situation, etc. So first of all, to show you, this is a game that I have created over here in Godot. It is not like a super big thing, but it is still a prototype that is completely playable, that does have some pretty interesting mechanics. It is basically a 2D endless runner. The player can move around, there are some decorations, a background that moves around, a player trail. As you can see, there are like lots of effects and that kind of things. And of course there are also lots of collisions with the ground, with the vehicles, with the coins, etc. So for instance, in this specific case, I used no collision layers or masks. If you go to any of these objects, as you can see, layer and mask are set to the default values. They have not been modified at all, because sometimes what you see in tutorials is that they, for example, go to project settings. Okay, let me move this to this monitor, and let me go now to the corresponding layers. Here, layer names, 2D physics, and well, for example, they have a layer for player, in this case vehicle, coin, ground, etc. So for example, they go to the player and say, okay, the player should be on the player layer. By the way, with these 3 dots, it is like maybe a little bit better than to have to review it over here. So yes, this is in the inside of the player layer, and in the mask it should look for collisions, not in players, for player collisions, but for vehicle collisions, coin collisions, and ground collisions. Okay, and for example, then the coin, for example, it would be on the coins layer, and in the mask, the coin, I just want to take the collision with the player, so that's okay. Or then finally the road, okay, or the ground over here, this is on the ground layer, and the ground should only be able to detect the collisions with the player. Okay, I don't want to detect collisions with anything else. So this is something that maybe you have seen, and it wouldn't be valid to do it, but this is not like the actual power of collision layers and masks, because you would be able to still do something like this. I believe much easier, maybe even more expandable. Well, I don't know if more expandable, but probably easier to expand. And that system is basically using groups. So basically, right now in the game, everything can collide with anything. The vehicles can collide with the decorations, the vehicles can collide with the ground, etc. So for example, over here in the main scene, in the main script and scene, this is where I'm handling the collision. So this is the on vehicle body enter function. So if the vehicle collides with the player, well, different things happen. The die audio is played, the vehicle disables the particles, the game over screen is shown, the tree is paused, etc. But well, basically here, the collision checking system that I'm using is groups, basically, and the same thing with the coins as well. But a pretty similar result could be achieved with layer masks and collision layers. Sorry, with collision layers and collision masks. So which is like the true power or the true potential of collision layers and masks? So yes, indeed, I am in Unity because, well, I have another game here in which I actually take advantage of collision layers and masks. Okay, they have different names, okay, different ways of setting them up, but the fundamentals of them are the exact same ones. Okay, so let me start off from the actual menu of the sim, so that we can actually see how collisions work in this game. There are more things in this game, but anyway, so what happens over here, okay, is that basically the player, okay, and the enemies do collide, okay, with as solid objects, with the obstacles, with this kind of card, these kind of trees, these fences, etc. They do collide. Okay, as you can see, I cannot trespass them, and neither can do the enemies. But for example, enemies, as you can see, can overlap with themselves. Okay, I can move through enemies, as you can see. This is basically how I set up collisions. So for example, enemies cannot collide with each other, okay, but they can collide with the obstacles, okay. And this is the actual magic of collision layers and masks. More exactly, in Unity, this is set up in the following way. For example, if I go here to the enemy, this is in the layer enemy, in the enemy layer, I'm sorry, and then, well, the player is in the corresponding player layer, etc. So then you basically go to the project settings, and here in physics 2D you have this collision matrix, layer collision matrix more exactly. And here you set up quite similarly to Godot, your enemy weapons, or for example, well, your enemy, what do you want your enemy to be able to collide with? I don't want my enemy to collide with the enemy weapons, basically with, for example, the knife or that kind of thing that the wizard have. I don't want to be able to detect collisions with it. Probably collisions won't actually like have any effect, okay? Because then in the code I check if I am colliding with, if I am an enemy and I'm colliding with a player and that kind of things, but still. But I do want my enemy to react to the player weapons. If the player touches the enemy with a knife, then the enemy should decrease the health. The same thing with the enemy and the tile map, or the obstacles themselves from the tile map. They basically should detect these collisions. That's why they don't trespass the fences and the trees. But lastly, they don't collide with each other. If I were to enable this, the game would be like pretty different, at least the collision management. Because if I do this, okay, and I press here play, now as you can see, enemies are going to be colliding with each other, and this is not an effect that I like a lot, because basically what happens sometimes is that physics like do not work as expected, okay, or they do get like a little bit overlap with each other while moving around. So I don't like that effect, to be honest. So well, that's basically how it works. Let's also see the other layers that I have over here. So let me disable this. And also, for example, the player can collide with enemy weapons, it can collide with player weapons, it can collide with the tile, but it can't collide with enemies. That's why I am trespassing them. Once again, let's quickly test this out. You are going to see that now I am colliding with the enemies, I am not going to trespass them. Okay, so as you can see, I am like pushing the enemy, okay, and this is a behavior that probably you don't want, okay. So that would be basically the concept. So basically, are collision layers and masks necessary? You should always use them. I believe that you should really like just use them if you want to, if you feel comfortable, because in some scenarios, as in this game, you can just use groups to manage your collisions, and at least for me it is much simpler. But in other cases, as the case that we saw in Unity, it is something that you will probably need, because I wouldn't know how to code the same behavior, okay, without using layers, okay. So if you just want to detect collision from one object to another, I would really suggest you just use groups. It is the most straightforward way of doing this. But on the other hand, if you have like more serious, more complex things related to physics and that kind of things, that you want to specifically talk what things can actually collide with the other, etc., then maybe collision layers and masks are the best choice. But once again, these are just tools. They really depend on the context of your game, so well, just use them wisely as you need to.
If you're serious about leveling up your Godot skills, check out my course. In less than 6 hours, you'll master Godot fundamentals while building this amazing project. Links in the description. See you there.